Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 11th or 12th best podcast about BC politics. The hashtag BC Poly Hot
At
Stove.
best.
Just kidding. Although every time I open up my podcast feed, I'm like, oh, now Binder Sajin has one, and it's fantastic. And I'm like, man, Maclean and I are in tough. I'm Jordan Bateman. I'm the VP Communications for the mighty ICBA.
And I am Maclean K, the editor-in-chief for the slightly less mighty Orca, live from the legislature in Victoria. Jordan, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Now, Maclean session is not in, so I imagine it's more ghost town than legislation town right now at the legislature.
Yeah, this is the one break week after three straight weeks, which is a long slog. And then we have next week back, and then that's it. But that's why there's no tie here today.
Oh.
I'm dressed like a real person.
That's right. Let me see some sleeves. Let me see. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. It's all happening. So I expect your letter of reprimand from Mr. Mullen at any moment then. There you go. All right.
Alan doesn't watch this podcast.
How dare he? How dare he? Does he download? Because he doesn't even have to listen. If he just downloads, I'm fine with that. Download and don't listen. We're okay with that. By the way, today does mark an important number for the Orca's podcast feeds. So in April, we actually tripled our audio downloads from March to April. And I can tell you, as of today, we have edged ahead of the April numbers for May. So the little podcast empire that is the Orca continues to grow, thanks mainly to people like Jody Vance and George Affleck and Bob Price and Rick Clough. And I guess we chip in with our 5 or 6 downloads as well.
Yeah, we're like the fourth line wingers that get 5-6 minutes of ice time a game. Right. As long as we don't take any penalties or get scored on, we're doing our job.
That's right. We're just killing time, waiting for the first liners to get out. All right. Well, on the front burner, Maclean, this drives me slightly bananas. We have the terms of reference for the long-awaited gas price review. John Horgan referring this mess of high gas prices to the BC Utilities Commission. One problem. He has forbidden them from looking at anything that the government has done to raise gas prices. This is only industry specific. Nothing about the huge gap in gas taxes between us and Washington State and between us and Alberta. Nothing about governments restricting the flow of petroleum products through things like pipelines. No. This is purely a industry is already to blame finger pointing exercise.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And you know what? I don't think this is a smart move. I think this is going to backfire. I think this is going to be an example of the Streisand effect.
Ooh, do explain.
Oh, well, if you've never heard of the Streisand effect, it's named after Barbara Streisand, who went out of her way, and I'm going to get the details wrong, but basically telling people and media absolutely under no circumstances are you allowed to fly over my home and take pictures. So, of course, they did fly over their home and take pictures. I think that there's a significant number of British Columbians who are prepared to accept John Horgan's argument that it's all the oil companies gouging us here. But having the BCUC, go out of their way to not look at any potential government impact. I mean, why would you do that? Unless they know that is absolutely the case, and they just want a piece of paper to point to at the end of the summer. But I honestly think this is going to backfire.
Yeah, look, I wrote a piece for the Orca where I, actually sat down and did the math, and it's something I'd done for the Taxpayers Federation a few years ago and updated now. But essentially, all but 3 cents of the difference in price per liter of gasoline in between Washington State and BC is gas taxes. And so I also find it a little nefarious that Horgan wants to compare the difference in gas prices between Alberta and British Columbia, but not between British Columbia and Washington State, which is actually what they should be comparing, because a lot of our petroleum products are shared with Washington State because that's where the refineries are. And let's not remember, he is restricted or he is fighting a pipeline that would add more capacity to flow petroleum products through to BC from Alberta. So if you really wanted to compare prices, you compare with Washington State. For one thing, drivers in Surrey can drive across to Blaine and see the price difference firsthand. But again, he knows as well as we do, it's gas taxes, which frankly, Maclean, politically, he's raised gas prices or gas taxes by 4 or 5 cents since he came to power. The BC Liberals over 16 years raised it by 20, 25 cents per liter. So it's a missed opportunity for him. He should be beating the drum saying, oh, Andrew Wilkinson, you wanted to stop this, but now you're you're the guys who raised these taxes in the first place. So he's being almost too cute by half.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's exactly what he's done. I think he's outthought himself. I think he obviously he wants a piece of paper from the BCUC that says it's all evil Jason Kenney, because it's a very easy answer. But A, as you've laid out, it's not accurate, and also B, I don't think it's going to help him as much. I think I think you're right. Going to Andrew Wilkinson and saying you're right. It is the taxes that's created huge high prices here, and frankly, you should apologize.
Yeah,
but
I don't get
he's
that.
not going to do that.
No, I don't understand at all. And so I think he's actually played again into the Liberals' hands. And, if there is one, Horgan's gotten a pretty gentle ride from the media over the first couple of years in power, mainly because he's different. He's not the same BC Liberal cabinet minister that they've been talking to for 16 years. He's had a little bit of a honeymoon in the polls. But on this gas price thing, this is as poorly handled a file as the NDP government have had. And they just keep stepping in it over and over and over again. It's like they can't resist the bear trap of this thing.
Well, they keep flailing, and the different the solutions and the explanations. I think there's been like 8 or 9 or 10 different lines we've heard, and so this is just sort of merely the latest. And by handing it off to the BCUC, we won't hear anything more about it until the end of the summer, which is of course when the prices will hopefully at least partially start to come back down a little bit, because obviously demand always increases for summer road trips, and that's true under any government. But you're right. There hasn't been any consistent messaging, and it's been a very sort of confused, and I was going to say the word impotent, but that's not what I mean. I do mean confused response from the NDP on this issue.
Yeah, they've really muddled through on this one. My suspicion on it is that very few of the people who actually are determining NDP policy or rapid response actually drive much. Gas prices to them are not that huge a deal. This is the problem with some of these political parties, is they become kind of insular things where everyone lives the same way. I do wonder if maybe they just are disconnected from the actual outrage that's going on there, and maybe they see it in some polling numbers but don't really believe it because it's not. It would be easy for them to rationalize as, this is a suburban issue where we don't win. This is a rural issue where we don't win. Let's just kind of nurse our way through this.
Well, yeah, you hear things like, well, why don't they just take the bus? Well, that's fantastic advice in downtown Vancouver. It's not as helpful in Williams Lake or Gabriola Island or places like that. But yeah, that's it exactly. This is it's a bit of an empathy deficit here, but also, to be fair to the NDP, I think that people like you who have actually done the math are vanishingly rare. The fact is, gas taxes are hidden, and the vast majority of people just see the high prices and think, thanks, Shell.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm curious where this goes next, and I guess the BCUC. If I were the UC, what's to stop them from actually throwing in a few lines about taxes?
Absolutely nothing, other than a stern rebuke from the Premier's office and getting a stink eye from Jeff Meggs for the next 2 years.
Perish the thought, but maybe one of these government agencies will do the right thing for us. One of these so-called independent watchdogs that never seem terribly independent. Actually, this ties into our what's on the front burner for you, and on Friday, it's court day.
That's right. We're going to finally hear from the BC Court of Appeal on the John Horgan's reference case to restrict bitumen shipments from Alberta. Bitumen. Which sounds nastier than oil. This is kind of Horgan said in the election campaign they were going to use every tool in the toolbox to try and stop the expansion of Trans Mountain. This was their biggest tool. If this somehow works, and it is a bit of a Hail Mary, but if it works, then it's going to be a significant headache and an obstacle for actually starting construction on this thing. But where to begin? It's if you actually one of the best people to talk about this. I kind of wish we were doing a three guest issue this week. CFAX's radio here in Victoria, Adam Sterling, talks about this issue a lot. He talks about it very well, and he talks about the years and years of jurisprudence going back to 1867 and the Confederation Act, and then 1982. And it's the point is that one province cannot unilaterally stop another province from exporting its goods through that province. It's simply not allowed. It's not how Confederation works. And Horgan's concerns about things like the environment are, that's fine, but they're a federal issue and there are mitigation factors in place. You can be against the pipeline, that's fine. But hoping that this court case succeeds, I think would be one of the most counterproductive things imaginable in this country.
Oh, yeah, because you can bet Alberta will immediately forbid the passage of BC wine through Alberta to other provinces.
Oh, yeah.
All sorts of other products. I mean, once you open this door, you can't close it.
Oh, exactly. If you think the 10 provinces are going to just sort of grow up and be adults if they're given the power to suddenly restrict goods from one province through the other, I mean, my God, which country have you been living in for the last 40 years? Do you really think that Quebec and Ontario aren't going to take the opportunity to play silly bugger with each other and occasionally tweak each other's nose over something like ice wine? It's going to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, all that said, it wouldn't surprise me. Look, BC Court of Appeal, either way, I think this is going to the Supreme Court of Canada.
Yeah.
If the reasonable people, mainly based in Alberta on this issue, happen to win this, if John Horgan's appeal reference case is defeated by the Court of Appeal, I do think it will go to the Supreme Court of Canada. I think it's a huge embarrassment for Horgan if in British Columbia's own Court of Appeal they don't side with him. But my suspicion is, I don't know, BC Court of Appeal, maybe they do go with Horgan and we end up in the Supreme Court anyways.
Well, I mean, we'll see. I think you're right in that this is eventually heading for the Supreme Court regardless. But as I say, I mean, it's perfectly legitimate to oppose the idea of expanding the pipeline. I don't, but I mean, I respect that viewpoint. But to also think that this particular tactic is dangerous in the long term.
Yeah. The BC, if the BC Court of Appeal says, no, BC does not have this right, does that give Horgan the out on this issue?
I think it might. I mean, he can say we tried. Yeah. It's you can't fight City Hall, and you definitely can't fight the federal government. It's their pipeline. We tried. We've done everything that was legally within our power. Because I mean, Horgan is not a dumb guy, and he knows, he reads the same polls we do, and he sees that the majority of British Columbians actually support the idea of building this pipeline, especially in places where they desperately need to at least stand a fighting chance of winning, places outside Vancouver and Vancouver Island. And so, just sort of letting it happen while being seen to have tried to stop it probably isn't the worst look for him. And I'm not 100% convinced that he's personally opposed to it anyway.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think that's the general theory is he's, more of the blue collar part of the party, probably okay with it. But of course, it all comes down to Dr. Weaver and this agreement, the CASA agreement, the governing agreement that the two parties signed that put him into place, that promised that they would use every tool. So, a stunning defeat for Horgan in the BC Court of Appeal. You're talking about millions of dollars to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, and what if there is no real strong argument to support BC's position in this? You do wonder if that's the out that he's been looking for.
Could well be the case.
Dr. Weaver, though, would not be happy and may pull the plug over it.
I mean, if you've read the Orca today and yesterday, Daniel Fontaine had 9 reasons why he thinks the NDP should have called an early election, and that was one of them. Is that the Greens may be only willing to play ball for so long because they do sort of have a growing sense of confidence on that side of the aisle.
Yeah, I think you could make 9 reasons why they shouldn't have. Why it was smart they didn't call an early election. Number one, voters hate snap elections.
Well, that's true. And then, I mean, to be fair to Daniel, he wasn't saying he thinks the NDP are great and would have won a blowout. He's saying, simply politically speaking, if he was advising them, he thinks they should have gone early. And there are certainly those in the NDP who feel the same way. Yeah,
no, absolutely. All right, back burner, second most important issue or story of the week. Mine is actually probably the biggest story for us here at the ICBA. The first contracts have been let out under the Community Benefits Agreement, this sweetheart deal that John Horgan's given 19 building trades unions who happen to give his party $2.5 million in donations. And lo and behold, it's costing taxpayers a fortune. The budget for this 2 kilometers, mind you, of road widening on Highway 1 near Revelstoke has jumped from a budget of about $55 million to I think it's $82 million. Or $50 million to $82 million. It's a $22 million jump already, And they're blaming some cost increases on steel. Absolutely, that is responsible for some of that cost increase. But also, even the government press release admits labor costs are a significant reason why they'll be over budget.
I mean, it's impossible for a government to tout higher pay for labor and then also act surprised when the labor is more expensive in the contracts. This is exactly what everyone said would happen. And I know you've been leading the charge on this, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but you said that it would be more expensive, and lo, here we are. And it is worth pointing out that this is not a huge project. We're talking about, I think you said 2 kilometers?
Yeah, 2 kilometers of road. It's not much. Now, it's like, and that to us is staggering as well. Like, how on earth is it this expensive? But I can tell you why. Part of it is several of the largest road building companies in British Columbia didn't bid because they did not want to have to fire their employees, have them join a crown corporation, have them join a different union, have them then be assigned back to their work crews. Mixed in with hardcore union supporters who don't give a fig about the reputation of the company. In fact, are more than happy to see those companies brought down. They were concerned about safety issues, mixing in new employees who don't know their own systems and don't know the way that their guys work. So those companies took a pass, and when you go from having 10 or 11 bidders on a project down to 4 or 5. That makes it more expensive. There's less competition. And this was the best bid by far. But even then, it's still wildly over budget. There actually are some questions that maybe you might be interested in talking to the Transportation Ministry about. The contract itself on the BC Bid website says it's for $51 million, yet the overall project is now $82 million. We're not sure where the other 30 is going, if they've split into 2 contracts, so it might be worth asking about that. But this is the first step in a lot of these contracts that are going to be let out. And what's going to happen is, okay, so yes, that portion of road gets done, and the next one. Eventually, though, you run out of money. Like, if you're overpaying to do those few kilometers of road, you can't do all the way to the Alberta border. You'll be reducing scope on Patello Bridge. You can forget about a new Massey crossing. Like, government has a finite amount of money, depending on how much they want to borrow and tax. There will be projects that will not get done in this province because they've overspent on labor.
Well, that's it exactly. And the NDP have at least made all the right noises and so far have balanced their budgets. And so I think they're aware that all things being equal, if they want to present themselves as fiscally responsible, a balanced budget is absolutely fundamental, which is great and commendable. But if you're not going to grow the pie, so to speak, and you spend more and more and more of it on union contracts, then you're absolutely right. It's less money for everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what do you got? What's on your back burner?
Well, it's gone quiet this week because the House isn't sitting and she's not having to face another barrage of questions. But Jinny Sims is the minister responsible for freedom of information, who has now twice been called on the carpet for subverting freedom of information laws. This issue isn't going anywhere. Her former constituency assistant, a woman named Kate Gilly, wrote a number of letters raising her concerns to everyone from the Privacy Commissioner to the Premier to, a number of places. And the only person who has said anything officially is the Privacy Commissioner, who was actually quite scathing, saying it is ridiculous that the minister responsible is the person responsible for investigating the minister. So in other words, this week we got the treat of saying Jinny Sims said that Jinny Sims didn't do anything wrong, and frankly, we should all apologize to Jinny Sims for daring to suggest that Jinny Sims did anything wrong. It's just, you don't have to be partisan to recognize this is a pretty clear conflict of interest. And this isn't Minister Sims' first strike. She's been in trouble before. And what Ms. Gilly suggested happened is pretty clearly what had been happening a year ago, and Horgan had to apologize. What's changed? Not much.
Yeah. Now, any chance at all that the NDP appoints someone independent to look at this?
No.
None.
No, I mean, if they do, it'll be someone like the BCUC. Well, they'll say, you can look at this, but under no circumstances are you allowed to look at Minister Sims' private email records. It's just, here's what I think is going to happen. I mean, if you actually sit in the House in question period and watch, the body language from the NDP is extremely telling. They do not like this issue. It is very embarrassing for them, and I will go so far as to say a lot of them are probably quite upset with Minister Sims. You can see it in their faces. The David Eby, who sits immediately in front of Minister Sims, makes a point of not clapping, staring at the ceiling, doodling on his pad. I mean, he's disgusted by this issue. You can see it, and he's not alone. Carol James just stares straight ahead. Normally, when a minister is taking heat, like Minister Claire Trevena earlier, she had support from her colleagues in the front benches. They applauded, they heckled back, they made it very obvious that they had her back. And that's normally the way things go when a minister's in trouble. With Minister Sims, nope, you can hear a pin drop in there, and it is awkward. And so what I think is going to happen is that we've long been rumored to get a cabinet shuffle this summer for no other reason than that's usually when these things happen, halfway into a mandate and during the summer. I would be shocked if Minister Sims is still responsible for this file come the next session in September, October. I don't know if she's going to get kicked out of cabinet entirely, but I think she will certainly be put in a less crucial ministry, and who knows, the NDP might have their first minister of state for some such thing.
Yeah, it's tough to shuffle these guys out though, because you need every single vote to keep your government afloat in the House. So
well, I mean, I don't think there's any danger that Jinny's going to vote against the government. I don't see that happening. We're not talking about kicking her out of caucus. I'm just saying probably not in cabinet anymore. So instead of sitting next to, Minister Claire Trevena and Minister Lana Popham, she'll be sitting next to, Nick Simons and Doug Routley in the NDP backbenches.
Talking about making $50,000 a year less.
Well, probably. But I mean, as I say, you can see it. This is not something they're happy about. This is a self-inflicted wound and an entirely unnecessary one.
Yeah, you mentioned Eby's body language during that. I noticed, it's the first time I ever saw Eby look small. It looked like he was actually trying to close in on himself. And Eby's, 6'7", 6'8". He's a tall guy. He was, trying to almost crawl under his desk at one point to disappear because he knows. One thing about Eby is, for a long time, civil liberties, he championed open, transparent government. He must be a little bit appalled with the way this has gone and the fact that it's been 2 years and the NDP's made absolutely no effort to improve the FOI laws, transparency laws, any of the things that they said they were going to do.
Well, it undermines the NDP's high ground on a number of issues, and it's not just FOI. It's things like how they treat whistleblowers. I mean, they made a lot of political hay out of former and embittered BC Liberal staffers going public with their complaints. Well, that's exactly what this is, and they are treating her, I would argue, worse because they're deflecting and saying there's no issue. Whereas with the BC Liberals, whatever you think about what happened, there were changes afterward. People lost their jobs, and there were directives to do things like keep all of your sent email, which is the NDP aren't doing now. So I mean, it's not as though they're learning from their mistakes.
Yeah. Oh, they're just transitory emails. Just transitory. Don't worry about it. The dumbest justification of all. All right, who's heating up? I'll tell you who's heating up. Maclean, this worries me. These guys are heating up. Unifor came out today with a couple of interesting little tweets and news items. Number one, they announced that this, by the way, is Canada's largest union. They just announced that they will be Andrew Scheer's worst nightmare during the upcoming federal election. This is the group that endorsed Trudeau in 2015, and apparently are going to stick with that. And you may be wondering why. Why would this union, representing 13,000 Canadians who work in media, why on earth would they be so hungry to keep Andrew Scheer out of power? Well, not coincidentally, Unifor has been given one of the 7 seats on the very prestigious panel that will determine which media outlets share in $600 million worth of government funding. Unifor is heating up, but for all the wrong reasons.
I mean, this is an issue that I have trouble even thinking across the other side of the aisle and wondering what the justification is. I know it's not a secret to you and probably to most of our, listeners and watchers that I have worked in the federal Liberal Party with under Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. This is an issue on which I just do not see eye to eye with the Prime Minister and his team on at all. I have a big problem with a union representing journalists taking such an active side in politics in general, but for them to, in the same, as you say, go from saying they're going to be the official opposition, their worst nightmare in the upcoming federal election, and then also having a say into which media outlets get federal funding. I mean, this is appalling. I mean, at the very least, it creates the perception of a conflict of interest. That is the very least. I think it's in practice going to be much worse. And I mean, if you are trying to restore some semblance of sanity to the political dialogue in this country, confirming every conservative's worst fear that they don't get a fair ride from the media is just exactly what we do not need in this country. I sincerely hope that cooler heads prevail, but I mean, it doesn't look good right now.
And I feel bad for some of the more, integral reporters and journalists and columnists who, happen to be Unifor members because, maybe they voted for it, maybe they didn't, but that's the way that their workplace is structured. I can see on Twitter that they're some of the ones who are the most critical of this because they know that this just is going to erode their credibility through no fault of their own. They don't get a choice in sending union dues to Unifor. They certainly don't have, as an individual, you don't have enough say in how those union dues are spent. Very, very concerning there. And second of all, you're right. It doesn't make any sense. It's so narrowly focused politically. It just, again, erodes that Trudeau brand of being something different. This is old boy cronyism at its worst. But Maclean, I am glad to hear that you will not be one of Katie Telford's op-ed writers on this particular case.
Not on this particular issue. And I mean, that actually raises a really good point. I mean, for a lot of these journalists, I mean, occasionally they will see something the Prime Minister's office does or the Liberal government does and say, hey, that's a great idea. Yeah. It does happen. Now it creates this kind of like, well, does he or she really mean that? Yeah, I think, yeah, do they actually agree? It's if that's now the doubt that's being raised in the back of your mind all the time, it's going to be really easy to start falling into this trap where you only read certain media, not others. And I don't know. I really don't like where this is going.
Yeah. Well, the editor of the New York Times today said that he thinks local media will be all but gone in 5 years in the States.
Which is depressing.
He says there'll be entire states without journalism.
Ugh. Well, subscribe to the Fin. Support emerging media in BC.
Exactly. All right. Who do you have? Who's hot for you?
Well, I mean, we kind of touched on this before. I was going to say that whoever's writing the speaking notes for the BC Liberal Summer Barbecue Circuit, the NDP are giving them a lot of really sort of easy, free material right now. We talked about Jinny investigating Jinny. We talked about Horgan forbidding looking at taxes when looking at the specifically excluding taxes when looking at the price of gas. I mean, you can go back to we were going to build a replacement for the Massey Tunnel, but the plans were too big and efficient, and traffic would have moved too quickly. That is literally one of the reasons given. So, I mean, Summer Barbecue Circuit's great because the speeches you're not talking half-hour addresses to people sitting at tables while you're standing at a podium. We're talking 5 minutes at most of your elevator pitch. And if you can address some of these things down to Jinny gets to investigate Jinny. Horgan says you can't look at taxes when figuring out why gas prices are so high. Why? And the Massey Tunnel replacement, you would be driving over it soon, but the NDP literally decided it was too big and would have got you home to your family safer, faster, too fast. And again, I'm not making that up. I may be spinning it slightly, especially on the Massey one, but literally too big and too much traffic going through was one of the reasons given for canceling it. So whoever's writing those barbecue speeches, you've got a lot of stuff to work with.
Yeah, bon appetit, bon appetit. All right, who's cooling off? I'm going to go south of the border. Jay Inslee, lately of John Horgan's weird bromance with Washington State. Inslee is the governor of Washington State. Apparently, he's running for president of the United States. He wants the Democratic nomination. And apparently, he's doing it on a climate change plan that he can't even get enacted in Washington State. But despite all that, he took on Beto O'Rourke. He went after him on Twitter over Beto's climate plan. Beto should have just said, hey, Jay, call me when you get yours through the Washington State House. But he was rewarded with a boost in the Democratic polls. He doubled his support in the latest Democratic polls. Maclean, he's gone from 0.3% support to 0.6% support. Maclean, when you double your standing and you're still under 1% in the polls, that is the epitome of a cold politician.
Well, I mean, Beto's response would be, I mean, if you can't get a climate plan passed in Washington State, what chance do you have of convincing the good people of Texas and Alabama and California? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yes, Beto should be saying, Jay who? I've never even heard of this guy. Come on. All right, who you got? Speaking of low polls.
Yes. Oh man. I'm going to go with Jagmeet Singh because yes, he won his by-election this year, but the NDP look like they're in a bit of trouble. There's a growing sense that they're looking at the Greens and panicking a little bit, and it's not just sort of guesswork and analysis. If you are active on social media and on places like some of the left-leaning media, you see a lot of very focused criticism that used to be directed at people like Andrew Scheer now being directed at Elizabeth May, accusing her of all kinds of things. There was a really weird piece in the Tyee, I want to say last week, basically accusing Elizabeth May of some sort of willful ignorance to First Nations issues in this country. And they brought up the fact that she's only mentioned Indigenous concerns, I can't remember the number, sometime in the House. So, of course, the Greens responded with saying, actually, your numbers are completely wrong. Here are all the other times she's brought up this issue in the House, and it's frankly quite a spurious thing because you're implying that every time you're not talking about First Nations, you're being a racist, and it's not a fight the NDP can win. I don't think they can point to the Greens and say, all these people that we said you can vote for and it's safe. Well, it turns out they're racists. It looks like the NDP. What the Savend Robinson's case that they fears they're being outflanked on the climate front by the Greens is probably true, and the NDP increasingly don't speak for working class people anymore, and so if you're Jagmeet Singh and you're probably not going to win a lot of your seats back in Quebec for depressing racial and societal reasons. You're looking at a pretty solid drubbing in the federal election. So, yeah, if you lose any of your seats to the Greens in BC, you're in deep trouble.
A couple of points on that. First of all, you mentioned that a weird article in the Tyee. I'd say 99% of the articles in the Tyee are a little bit weird. And second of all, you know how there's always this debate within the BC Liberal Party whether they should get rid of the BC Liberal name because it's too attached to the Liberal brand federally, and you have people who hate Justin Trudeau, and what about the Conservatives, and yada yada yada. Does that conversation ever happen in NDP land? Like, if Jagmeet Singh bottoms out here, does that have any kind of drag whatsoever on John Horgan?
Well, it's trickier for them because, you mentioned the BC Liberals, and that's not a great comparison because there is no tie whatsoever between the BC Liberals and any federal party. The NDP are unique in Canada in that if you, Jordan Bateman, join the BC NDP today, you have also joined the federal NDP.
God forbid.
The secret is out. But that is, they cannot detach because they are the same party. The BC NDP are a branch operation of the NDP. That is not true of any other provincial party in British Columbia, and it's not true of most provincial parties across the country, even if they share a name like the Federal Conservatives and the Ontario Progressive Conservatives, or even the Alberta Liberal Party, which looks a lot more like the Federal Liberal Party, and even down to color scheme. Not a branch of the Federal Liberal Party. So the NDP have a sort of unique situation in that respect. It works for them in a lot of respects because they get to share things like databases and mailing lists. But if one side is tanking, they can become a bit of an albatross.
Yeah. Alberta Liberals also share with the Federal Liberals single-digit support in the polls in Alberta. So
it was the first example that came to mind, and probably not the best one.
We'll workshop that for our next episode. We'll come back with a better example than the most unpopular parties in Alberta history. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the Hot Stove. You can follow us at The Orca BC, facebook.com/The Orca BC. We will be back next week, smack dab in the middle of the final week of the legislature sitting. Then they get, 3 months off, 4 months off?
Back on October 1st or something like that.
Yeah, and any talk of a snap election seems to be gone now. Hey, there's no...
I don't see that happening at all. And if it does happen, it's not... the closer we get to the federal election, the less likely it's going to happen. There's going to be one here. If we get one, the trigger will be the government collapsing with a budget or throne vote, which won't happen. But if it did, that would happen next spring.
Right. All right. Well, there you go. It would happen next spring. It ain't going to happen now. So just ignore those fundraising emails that come out from certain right of center political parties claiming it's going to happen this week. All right, that's it for us. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening and watching.